So, I'm not even really sure where to start with this episode, so I guess we will just start from the beginning. It is worth noting that there are some things here that were somewhat up for question, but more or less pretty obvious when we ended the last episode, which is obviously DJ Qualls was the third guy with Yuri and Mamo after the crash, and then she was still... I didn't realize at the time that she was chained to Mr. Wrench, so it makes sense that he's obviously still there after the fact. And then it kind of turns into sort of like a Defiant One scenario for them. But it's... but before that, or, well, in between that, there was something, just one little thing now, that, because I started the last episode with a bit of a complaint, and it seems to have happened again, when the episode began with Nikki's arrest being an exact replica of the scene where Jerry is arrested in the original movie. And my complaint was, it's nice when you kind of carry over little details from Coen Brothers movies, particularly the original movie, but entire scenes might be a bit overkill. But sure enough, this episode begins with our villains doing something on the side of the road that they really shouldn't be, and two innocent bystanders come rolling by in their car. It's pretty much the exact same shot of them seeing what's happening and then speeding off, and one of our crew here going after them to where their car flips over on the side of the road and they're killed execution style. Exactly the same. I suppose we didn't see it play out in full like that. We saw it in kind of like the start of it and then the aftermath, but I mean still, it's the exact same thing. And I will stress once again, I would like if we cut down on that a little bit and just brought it to simply just kind of carrying over little details that kind of add something to the scene itself while kind of working as a nice callback to something else, as opposed to just kind of being a replica situation. But anyway, so continuing on and watching Nikki and Wrench kind of try to avoid Yuri and DJ Qualls' character. It's a nice, intense, good, 20 minutes portion of this episode is. And then we learn really quickly that when you go back to the episode before, and we see this mysterious DJ Qualls character come in, and as I said, he has like the precision to use a syringe and all that, and he's clearly a guy that's relatively good at what he does. He's able to escape despite the fact that Gloria has a gun on him. So it's like, okay, this guy's probably pretty good. Well, that was kind of a false alarm, wasn't it? So he first goes up to Wrench and immediately gets his ass kicked. And then about 15 minutes later, after a chase, he has lost his fucking head. So... so that wasn't quite what we probably thought it was going to be, but still, like, I kind of thought it was going to be more like he kind of ends up being somebody even more threatening and even more, you know, shrewd than, say, Yuri and Mamo, but that is apparently not the case. And the thing here is, it was actually to the point to where I had to do, I wanted to do some research on him, because it seemed like he was supposed to be more than he was, especially when you put a recognizable face on him. So, apparently the only thing I could really find out was, I guess his character name is the Golem, which is not in fact a reference to the Lord of the Rings character played by Andy Serkis, but in fact a reference to like Jewish folklore, which obviously has been somewhat of a theme and becomes kind of a big theme once Yuri gets to the bowling alley later. So I guess that's the extent of that. And obviously we have Yuri and Mamo being separated as well, because Mamo never comes back after he chases off the witnesses. And then, obviously Yuri ends up losing an ear and we're not really sure what becomes of him until the bowling alley happens. And let's just, I guess, it's here, let's just go ahead and talk about this bowling alley real quick. Where we are met with Ray Wise's character again from episode 3, I think it was. The one where Gloria went to California and it seemed like nothing really mattered in that episode. But I did speculate that maybe something Ray Wise said would come back, or maybe trigger something in Gloria. I wasn't quite expecting a return of that character in this fashion, but alright. It certainly leaves a lot to be discussed. Starting with, it's worth noting, obviously, like I said, I feel kind of stupid even mentioning this, because it's like, well, no shit, you don't even have to mention that, everybody knows. But, obviously, the shot of Nikki coming in and walking up to the bar, and then the way the camera kind of pulls out and kind of brings into the frame Ray Wise's character is pretty much an exact recreation of the shot when we're introduced to Sam Elliott in Lebowski. And then the scene kind of plays out like that too, but it's not, but obviously, unlike my earlier complaints, this is a scene where visually it's set up like Lebowski, but the contents of it are insanely different. I do wonder if maybe Ray Wise is kind of working kind of like Sam Elliott did in Lebowski, where it's almost like he's kind of on the outside of the story looking in, kind of like a narrator who's actually got a physical form. Like we could never see Ray Wise again after this episode, or it could be like Elliot and Lebowski, and he could be our closing shot for like the season. I guess we'll find out. But yeah, this is the point where the show kind of takes that turn into the we're not exactly totally in reality now, and well, the thing here is that a lot of people seem to really take to this, like especially like the portions in season 2 also that kind of somewhat delved into somewhat territory like this, which is when we kind of go, because the original movie was just like a straightforward crime movie that didn't really have a lot of overly philosophical stuff in it, like to this extent. But obviously the Coen brothers' work has before, like for instance, the hotel where Roland Barton Fink literally being hell. So there is stuff like that in their work, but not necessarily the movie for Fargo. But the idea of blending this for the series is good. I do think, me personally, I know a lot of people seem to prefer it when it goes off the rails like this and just goes into this really sort of abstract territory. I don't know. As far as, like, I mean, I hate, you know, those ridiculous crime shows like CSI and NCIS and whatever in God's name else is out there, because they're just boring and redundant and they just don't matter. But when you're telling a crime story like the original Fargo does, then I don't mind if it's, you know, just a straightforward, you know, crime story and all that, investigations, you know, criminals, all that. So kind of throwing this into the mix doesn't make me as excited about the story as it might many other viewers, but I think the thing though is that it feels more like, because we're kind of combining a Coen Brothers thing in general, and with some of the directions some of the others went, I don't think it's completely out of the realm tonally for the series, for this episode to go in this direction, but for this season, I think it's a little out of nowhere. Even though it does seem like we've been kind of, you know, they've been throwing in little tiny things here and there, like introducing Ray Wise's character as early as they did, just to bring him back this late. So they've been kind of throwing in those, they planted those seeds throughout this season, but still, I know this whole bowling alley scene, being this late in the series, just kind of seemed a little off in regards to where we were headed, you know, for the past 7 episodes prior to it. Where it seems to be, the most straightforward thing seems to be, it's like some kind of purgatory or something, and Ray Wise here is kind of acting as like, he's acting in two different ways when he meets Nikki and then when he meets Yuri. Where it's almost like he's Nikki's kind of guardian angel, and then he's kind of, because he's all about punishing the wicked when he's talking to Nikki and telling her, you know, just make sure you get this message to the wicked and all that. And then when Yuri, part of the wicked, I suppose, comes in, he's confronted with apparently what is his past, which is, hey, shock, surprise, that scene from the very first scene from this season apparently isn't totally pointless. I was actually starting to wonder for the past couple of episodes if that was just going to be kind of like the opening scene to A Serious Man, when it really has nothing to do with the rest of the story. It's just kind of like a prologue that very, 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 very vaguely might hint at what happens in the rest of the movie, but more or less has absolutely nothing to do with it. I kind of started to think that's what that opening scene was going to be, but it seems it's tied to Yuri in some way. And then we get that whole thing about, well, for starters, he's bleeding very, very heavily, and I do like that little moment when he's bleeding from, like, all places, and he just sits down and calmly says napkins. But then there's the whole thing where, was this Yuri's end? This confronting his past with Ray Wise? Because, number one, if this is some sort of purgatory, it makes sense. And secondly, there's the whole thing where Emmett kind of casually says to Varga, your other guy didn't come back. So it'll be interesting to see if we kind of really, really play up Yuri's backstory, and that's how we send him off instead of going further into him. But once again, I guess we'll just have to wait to see. This is when it gets very, very fuzzy on what to expect. Because if there's one thing you can give this season credit for, it has not been the most predictable. So at least there's that. Whether the ways they go about this are favorable or not depends on the person, I suppose. But yeah. So we'll see. And then the other thing we had come into this is we really... Obviously, I was concerned about Ray leaving this story when he was killed off in episode 6. But they are kind of figuring him into this in certain ways. He's like... It's like he comes back in a number of ways here. Where you actually see an image of him over Emmett, like, just freaking out. But then there's also this cat scene with Nikki, where I seem to have to finally come to terms with how Nikki felt about Ray, because obviously I've been saying this whole time, I feel like Nikki's been very shady, and I felt like she was using Ray, and that it was a one-sided relationship. This cat scene obviously makes that seem totally different, because we finally see a very sort of, when she's like presented with something that could ultimately be Ray in a sense again, we see a side of her we don't really see at all, and that is this kind of heartbroken longing for a love in her life that's no longer there. And there's like the moment when she almost walks away with the cat, and that heartbreaking moment when she has to give it back to him, and she does the whole, you know, when the Gophers are playing, put beer in a bowl and all that. And it's really, it's kind of like, I guess she really did love him. Either she's really loved him this whole time, or his death has brought out feelings that weren't initially there, or feelings she may have been ignoring before. But they probably were there the whole time, and I was misjudging her. However, the approach we're still taking to her character, though, because she was still a pretty hardcore character. I mean, she was the character in the first episode that said, oh, Scoot McNairy's gonna get away, let's drop this air conditioner on his head. And there was something very ruthless about her for a while there. So it's interesting, this approach we're taking, to where she's she's like the sympathetic character now. And how we're supposed to take that, and how I guess maybe it's a redemption thing, where it's like Ray Wise is here to punish the wicked and maybe give a chance to the people who don't have one, or have less of a one. And so Nikki here is getting this kind of free pass by being given the car and all that. So yeah, I guess it's a Nikki's redemption angle that Yuri is most likely not going to get, and probably shouldn't. So I guess the big turnaround was the beating she received from Yuri and Mimo, where it was kind of like, once her character really realized how far the situations can go, and which has now been totally and completely amplified by Ray's death, now she kind of accepts, you know what, maybe the life I was doing wasn't where I should be going. And so this is kind of her getting another shot at doing something, you know, to make things right. Punishing the wicked, I suppose. So there's a good chance, especially with Emmett buckling down at the end and turning himself in, that Nikki's pretty much the only person left apart from, you know, Gloria and Winnie, as far as bringing Varga down. And we didn't see Shea Wiggum's ass this time, so maybe it'll be... There shouldn't be, despite the ineptitude of Shea Wiggum's character, there should not be a whole lot holding them back when Emmett just comes in and flat out confesses. Now the question is he just going to confess about what happened to Ray? Is he going to go into the whole Varga thing too? That'll remain to be seen, because now he's been kind of brought to a dead end with this, now that we've seen what's become of Sai, where it did seem kind of weird for us to have this kind of 3-month jump in time, when it's this scene between Varga, Mimo, and Sai, where it's kind of like, he makes Sai, like, food on Christmas morning and then gives him a drink, and it's kind of like, in the back of your head, you're like, oh no, don't take stuff from Varga, it could be poisoned. But at this rate, this is one of those shows, and Varga's one of those characters where it's like, well, maybe he just wants to seem like he's friendly, just to kind of talk to you and get into your head. No, he doesn't want to get into Sai's head. It's just straight up fucking poison. It seemed like a jump that seemed sort of... Obviously, Varga has shown to be kind of a ruthless character throughout this, but, I don't know, it seemed kind of like the writers were like, okay, we only got about 2.5 episodes left. Let's get to the point to where Varga starts, you know, physically fucking people up. Even, like, major character. Obviously, we saw the parking garage dude earlier in the season, but when we're really getting into the main characters now, and I know I was saying before that I felt Sai's days were numbered, it sounds like Sai's gonna, I guess true to his character, go out with a whimper. Most likely not waking up from this 3-month coma he's already been in. But I don't know, it's still kind of, this whole angle with poisoning Sai and him going into a coma after we've done this whole bowling alley thing, it kind of feels like either the writers are really, really starting to point us in one particular direction, or they're really starting to lose their way and get their shit jumbled a little bit. It honestly could be either one. That's, I guess, going to be the fun or the not-so-fun of the next 2 episodes to find out which one of those it is. But we'll see. But I imagine... I know, like I said, people typically like the abstract stuff and the sort of... I don't know if it's just because it's Ray Wise that I think this, but the Lynchian way of doing things. But I don't know. I guess it just really depends on where it goes. But I also feel like trying to go an abstract route could also be, you know, early signs of the writers aren't really sure where to go from here, so they're just going to throw shit in the air and see what happens. But we'll see. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say maybe they've got some really interesting directions to go in the last 2 episodes here. Or this may be like this is kind of a one thing, and we're not really going to necessarily go into this territory for the rest of the show, but it was kind of like, it's a starting point for the end, and then everything will be relatively in reality for the last 2 episodes. But I don't know, because then because obviously on top of the Ray is possibly the kitten thing, number one, that could be a number of things. It could, obviously Nikki took it as, oh my god, is this actually Ray? But then, or it could just be a reference to Inside Llewyn Davis, where the way Ray Wise says Ray is the cat is like delivered exactly the same way Oscar Isaac delivers the line with a different name. Or it could be the Peter and the Wolf thing back when I think it was supposed to be Nikki that was the cat when we first went through that, and now it's like, well, maybe Ray's the cat in this story. But I'm still, the Peter and the Wolf allegory is still very like vague when you look at the overall story and what this series is doing. But it's still kind of, I feel like it's very, very loosely in there, and it's probably not as cohesive as they may have hoped it would be when they first thought of it, but still, if we're kind of changing that up a little bit, maybe there's something. Obviously we go on that also with Yuri having the wolf skin, because, you know, sometimes we just don't care about subtlety. That's but anyway, so going on that also, Ray also seems to be making a return in Emmett's mind as well, when it's clear he's being gaslighted by somebody, with the stamps being on the wall and seeing his car and all that. And it's kind of like in the mustache, and it's kind of like, this I wasn't so sure about either, because I know Emmett is really distraught right now, and I know Emmett is not exactly the brightest of people, like a lot of people in a Coen Brothers universe, but I don't know whether it's... My first thought was, well, obviously, anytime something bad in this series happens, you immediately think, well, that's probably Varga, or that's most definitely Varga. And so when you see Emmett being gaslighted, your first thought is kind of like, well, what's Varga doing to him now? But then when he has that conversation with Varga, and Varga doesn't necessarily... He doesn't seem in a way to where it's totally him, but then it starts to occur to you, well, there was a 3-month jump, and then it's like, oh, well, actually it'd make a lot more sense if it was Nikki that was gaslighting him with the help of Mr. Wrench, I guess. And it kind of seemed like a bit of a... Like I said, I know Emmett's very distraught and not all that bright a lot of the time, but still, it did seem very sudden for his character to not think first that he's being gaslighted by somebody. That his immediate thought is, Ray is haunting me, Ray is alive. It seemed very sudden for his character to come to that conclusion, that was the very first thing he jumped to. But then again, I guess it's easy for the writers, because when you gaslight somebody, that's generally the outcome they were probably looking for, was to convince him that Ray is alive and messing with him. But I don't know, it just seemed all very, like, it was coming into play a little too easily, from a writer's perspective, but still. And then going on that, she probably has a partner in Mr. Wrench now, is... Obviously, my initial prediction was that Mr. Wrench was just a haha cameo and then he'd be gone. But now it seems he's quite crucial to Nikki. Number one, he helped her get out, and then they managed to kill DJ Qualls together and get out of this. He's the one that subdued Yuri with the axe. But still, there's still something here to where it's like... Obviously, the whole thing with Wrench here is we initially know him from being of two people with Adam Goldberg in the first season. So this kind of shows us that we cannot know Mr. Wrench unless we know him as a cohort with another person. And in that case, I guess he's going to adopt Nikki as that person now. Even to the point that you think, oh, well, they have to stick together because they're chained together. But then once their chain is broken... they don't go their separate ways, which is what I kind of thought would be the case, and then we just never see Mr. Wrench again. But no, he's still here. And obviously Nikki has to be getting help from somebody, assuming she's the one that's gaslighting Emmett. That's obviously the most logical point to come to, is it's gotta be Mr. Wrench. Because there's nobody off the top of my head I can really think of. Because I think Ray Wise is out of this now. After he's pointed her in a direction, that's all he really has to do is point her in a direction and take care of Yuri. And then, like I said, unless he comes back in like the very last scene to send us off, like Sam Elliott and Lebowski, we may just never have to see him again. Or he may, you know, come back to Gloria in some way, which, obviously, if we're bringing in, you know, entities of sorts now to be like angels of, you know, guardian angels or angels of death or whatever, that brings to mind, well, there is that whole Gloria having trouble with censors thing. Does that mean anything if we're having characters in this that may not exist in reality? I doubt it. But, Gloria's obviously still... because Ray Wise has no connection to anybody. He is just a character that appears and disappears. Whereas Gloria has a whole family, has a job, has people that constantly interact with her. Maybe it's just a symbolic way of saying that she's like Ray Wise, only she's still human. Who the fuck knows what that censor thing is? I don't know. I don't know. At this point, I'm almost thinking the writers may have forgotten. But once again, just as the prologue to episode 1 tells us, just when you think the writers have forgotten they put something in, they remind you that they remember, no matter how loosely it is, or how epiphany-inducing it is. Something will come back eventually, or something will tie into something. It's just a matter of how sloppy or cohesive it feels. But we've still got 2 episodes to go to figure all that out. So, yes, is that it? As far as this episode goes, that might be it. So, there's a lot of stuff they've given us to chew on. Whether or not it's worthwhile, I guess will be found out. I don't know. It's just all kind of really hard to say when you get an episode like this. It gives you a lot in regards to kind of tying some things together, or kind of figuring out things that were there before and are coming back now, whether it be something from episode 1 or episode 3. It all kind of seems to be coming to a head here. And then you get an ending like Emmett saying he'll confess, but then again, there's been a lot of endings of episodes that play up like they're going to go into something big, and then it just kind of goes by the wayside, or it's resolved very quickly. But then again, we do only have 2 episodes left. Now the question is are we going to have a really big last 2 episodes, or is the next episode just going to be more or less filler and build up to see what the last episode gives us? I guess we'll find out. It'd be really nice if they put all their effort into both those episodes, but history tells us that that's hard to pinpoint. So, as I was saying before, at least if there's one big thing we can give this season credit for, it's how unpredictable it is. So I guess it's really hard to say what's going to happen in the last 2, but that's why we'll watch and find out. So that's, I guess, going to be it for this one. There's going to be, tomorrow there's going to be a Versus, and then Sunday will be the Mummy review, which I'm now a bit worried about, given I was initially excited because Tom Cruise can typically do no wrong unless that movie's Jack Reacher 2, but it looks like he might possibly strike out twice in a row, but I'll leave it to the viewing itself to figure that out. Maybe it's that kind of territory. So until then, yeah, we're done.